Hello everyone, my name is Trey Stubbs. I'm a licensed counselor. I'm also the clinical director at Sojourn Counseling in Broomfield. I also help out here at Flatirons in pastoral care and the care ministry and Shift, our recovery ministry. And I'm here just to help with a parent resource on how to parent kids and teenagers through technology and social media and video games and all things in that regard. This talk is really, the goal is to try to take us through elementary through the teenage years. And so if you guys have kids in that teenage year, all the way down through elementary years, hopefully this will be supportive for you guys and helpful. We're gonna have this be two sessions. The first one here, I'm just gonna identify some stats and some of the problems and issues that we're facing. And then in the second one, I'm gonna get a little more practical and try to talk through specific tips for you guys as parents, how to set boundaries, how to have some of those consequences, what that can look like, and try to get real practical for you guys. So to start here, 89% of teenagers have smartphones, and 70% of them say they use social media multiple times every day. Snapchat is currently most popular, followed by Instagram, and TikTok is on the rise as well. On any given day, American teenagers, so 13 to 18-year-olds, average close to 9 hours of media use per day. And tweens, so 8 to 12-year-olds, use on average close to 6 hours of media per day. And so this is certainly confronting us and facing us as parents as well as our students. And 84% of teen boys between the ages of 13 to 17 play video games on their phones, computers, tablets, and consoles like the Xbox and PlayStation. Now, I have more stats to go as we share, but basically, we have to set the foundation of we know this affects everybody. This is a struggle for everyone. Every parent who has a kid is going through this, and I think every parent who has a kid feels like they struggle in this area. And so the first thing is, I hope you guys rely on each other. I hope that you're able to find other families and parents who have similar values and have some similar aged kids who are trying to walk through this together. Our kids, they've been deemed digital natives, meaning they have grown up with this. They've never known a world where this doesn't exist. And we know that's just not true for us. In one of my sessions with a teen client recently, I was trying to describe to him what dial-up internet was. And he asked me, he's like, is that where the phone kind of has that dial where you have to scroll the numbers? And in that moment, I think, okay, yeah, he has no idea what I'm talking about. Trying to explain signing on to AOL.com and that high-pitched beeping noise. He had no clue what that was. He's a digital native, whereas we are more so digital immigrants in this. This is a little bit newer for us. We're still trying to figure this new world out. We also have to remember how quickly tech moves. We will probably always be behind. I think we're always going to be playing catch up. It moves so quickly, unfortunately, we can't get ahead, and so all we can do is do our best to try to keep up. Second, as we go through this, I want to communicate, I don't believe there is a right way or a wrong way. I think the only wrong way would be simply to bury your heads in the sand, to just not really try. Just give the kids the phone and kind of throw up your hands up in the air and say, hey, I hope this works out. I think that's really probably the only wrong way, but I don't think there is specifically a right way or wrong way. It really depends on your values as a parent, it depends on your kids, it depends on how you want to do this as a family. Third, in my experience, not every kid is as challenging as others, and kids vary a lot. I have a teenage client I've been working with, and he's just really drawn towards outdoors. He's really drawn towards social events. He's very extroverted. He likes sports and music and academics and being involved in clubs and outings. So he just naturally isn't as drawn to tech and media as much as another student I'm working with. Same age, very similar demographic, but he really is much more drawn towards technology. In his ideal world, he'd be down in his room for 10, 12, 14 hours a day. His community is through the gaming and those kind of online chats. Right? And it's not necessarily anything the parents did that was wrong there that kind of pushed one kid towards being more active and one kid's more towards tech. I think some of that is based on personality too. And so we're going to have to parent one student differently than we parent the next. Fourth, I do recognize that there is an exception to almost everything I say here in these next two sessions. So you may be listening saying, well, I've already tried that, or I did that, or I know a parent who tried to do that and it didn't work. And I would say, yeah, I get it. There is no perfect way, and so therefore there is an exception to almost everything that we talk about. So really is how hard are we trying? Are we working? Are we doing our best? I also hope that provides grace for you guys to know that when your kids do make mistakes, or when you make a mistake, or it just doesn't work out, that you have grace with yourself knowing that, you know what, we're doing the best that we can. Fifth, I don't believe that tech is a problem to be solved for our kids. I don't think it's like acting where we can try to just do everything we can to make it go away. So I don't think tech is a problem to be solved, but it is a context to parent in. It isn't inherently bad, but it is very, very powerful. So I think it's something that we need to prepare our kids for, not protect them from. Just the way with driving, right? You're not going to give the keys of a car to a 12-year-old and say, hey, good luck, do what you can do. No, we prepare and we have tests, we have driver's ed, we get them ready for when they're 16 or 17 to actually go and drive that car. And I think that tech is very similar. We have to prepare them to drive. I think we need to prepare them to use the internet. So why is this so important? And what harm can actually be done through these devices? The first part here is there are effects on mental health. I don't think that comes as a surprise to anyone. New York Times Magazine did an expose on anxiety disorders and teens. And the stats are getting higher and higher and higher with anxiety. 1 in 5 teens now will experience a clinical anxiety. And especially for those kids who are in AP classes or who take academics more seriously, or even kids in affluent families and areas, that number gets as high as to 1 in 3 kids will have some type of clinical anxiety. A few years ago, just 1 in 11 teens would have a major depressive disorder. Now it's 1 in 8. And of that 1 in 8, typically only 1 in 5 of those teens will actually get help. There was a documentary recently out on Netflix, which you guys may have seen, called The Social Dilemma. And they gave this stat, and I thought it was really interesting, that the number of U.S. hospital admissions for non-fatal self-harm for females was very stable until about 2009. And then in 2009, girls aged 15 to 19 in non-fatal self-harm, that increased 62%. And then girls 10 to 14 increased 189%. And then with suicide, or suicide attempts and suicide ideation, it's up 70% between the 15 and 19 age group, and 10 to 14 is up 151%. And in the documentary, they asked, well, what changed in 2009? And is that social media became available on smartphones in around 2009. Because this is the first generation in history that has social media available in middle school, that available on their phones, available in their rooms, available at all hours of the day. I think we think about ourselves in middle school, and I cannot imagine having access to that as a 12-year-old boy. And yet that is oftentimes what we are handing over to our kids. Majority of middle schoolers have smartphones now. I also notice, as far as the mental health goes, that just the distraction that we can use our phones for and technology, it's kind of like this digital pacifier. And I especially see that with Gen Z students that I work with. I think we tend to avoid boredom as if it's something that's going to harm us, if it's something that needs to be feared. And I think many students actually do fear boredom, so they avoid it with everything that they can. But see, I don't think it's something to be feared. I think it's something to actually be leaned into. Because when we can capitalize on our boredom, it typically leads us to action, whereas distraction leads us to inaction. Boredom also gives us the silence to just sit and be with ourselves, to be with our thoughts. I've challenged many students, both teenagers as well as adults, to just even sit in silence in their cars, not have music blaring or distraction happening. And many people get so anxious about the thought of just being in silence. We so are quick to use our phones as this pacifier to make us feel better. And then when we do that, we really don't stay very in touch with ourselves, with the emotions, the thoughts, the feelings that are going on underneath the surface. I use an example of a dog. If I'm watching TV or I'm doing something and a dog comes up and kind of starts to bark at me, my first inclination is to kind of shoo it away, like just kind of go away. And if I can just avoid you, maybe you'll go away for good. But I know that never really works with a dog, because typically it's bothering me for a reason, right? It needs to be taken out, or it needs just some love. I think with our thoughts, we often tend to shoo them away. Just hope that if I can just avoid it, if I can distract from it, if I can just shut it down, maybe it'll go away. But just as a dog, if we shoo it long enough, it's either going to get louder and bark and get more annoying, or it's going to go and poop on your carpet, right? It's not just going to go away. And I think that same is true with our thoughts. If we distract from them long enough, if we avoid them long enough, it's going to get louder and louder and more annoying in our lives, or it's going to go make a mess somewhere in our lives as well. We have to be able to really lean into what's going on underneath the surface to cope with what's happening. But when we use our phones and technology, it's going to build unprocessed emotions, and thoughts oftentimes do lead to anxiety and depression. So the first one is we see there is a mental health component there. Number 2, is there an addiction component? 59% of parents say they think their kids are addicted to media, whereas 50% of teens feel addicted to their mobile devices, which is interesting to say that half of teenagers would actually admit, I feel addicted to this. Where 27% of parents feel like they are addicted, And 28% of teens think their parents are addicted to their mobile devices. But interesting, those stats are very similar. About 1 in 4 teens think their parents are addicted, and 1 in 4 parents would admit that they are addicted. I want to explain this process in our brain just a little bit. Developers, when they are developing an app or a video game, the goal is to keep you engaged for as long as possible. And so they give you these notices or applications that kind of try to get your attention, the notifications on your phone. And every time we get that notification or that friend request or that picture that's been tagged or that new level or that new high, whatever it is, it triggers our brains to say, we like that. There's a dopamine rush that happens in our brains. And dopamine is a good thing. I believe that as God has wired that into our brain when we've had a good workout or worked really hard or had a good meal or a great conversation with friends or just having fun. That dopamine starts to rush and it actually makes us want to do that activity again. It's a reward center. It's a good thing. But it's also supposed to be able to end after a good meal or a workout or a time hanging out with your friends or a really stressful season where you really do well in work or in school. You kind of have a time to rest too. And so then that dopamine comes down, our brains kind of start to regulate in a different way again. But with video games, with applications, with apps, it doesn't stop. Right? There's always something else. There's always more to get your attention. In video games, there's always another level. There's always another game. In apps, there's always more to consume. There's always another picture to look at. And so our brains actually start to get rewired to become dependent on this phone or this media to get that same dopamine, that same happiness feeling, to where we get dependent on it, where we start to feel addicted. Neurons that fire together, wire together, we see happening is this rewiring of young brains around tech because the dopamine receptors are becoming dependent on their tech to stimulate dopamine production in the brain. And you have too much of that for too long, and you start to see addictive behaviors. I want to go through 7 different addictive behaviors that I see or that I might be looking for when working with a teenager or with an adult and kind of recognizing, hey, there might be something going on here. The first one is an obsession, where it's kind of all they can talk about, right? They're just obsessed with their technology, with the game, with the app, with their phone. There's just this obsession that I need it. I need to have it on me. Number 2 is an out of proportion reaction when that thing is taken away. Imagine many of you experience this with your kids. When you try to take away that game or that phone or that console, they freak out and they have this panic reaction or this really angry, out of proportion reaction to it being taken away. Now that in and of itself isn't enough to diagnose an addiction, but it is another symptom or indicator of addiction. Number 3 is a disinterest in activities that they used to enjoy. So they used to love going and playing soccer, or they'd go hang out with their friends more often, or they used to even enjoy going to work or having some projects. There are these things that they like to do, and then all of a sudden, they don't really find much enjoyment in it anymore. Now really what they want to do is to be a little more reclusive and just hang out on their media or on their technology. Right? When you start to lose other types of interests and it just kind of comes into this one bucket, that's another symptom or indication there might be something else going on. Number 4 is covering up their usage or lying about it or trying to hide it. This is a very addictive behavior with any type of substance or chemical or product. Right? We start to try to hide it. We did the deleting of the history type of situation. Are they hiding this from you? Or are they pretty open about it? Number 5 is isolation, where they're not spending a lot of time with friends or family anymore. They're harder to have a conversation with. You feel them kind of slipping away into the basement or into their bedroom for long periods of time. Is their isolation. Number 6, using their technology as an escape or a distraction from real life. It's kind of that self-medication. It's that digital pacifier we've been talking about. Once again, it's a very strong indicator of addiction to anything. When we need to self-medicate with something to feel better, when we don't necessarily have the coping skills to be okay, we need something to make us feel okay. And then lastly, a change in eating habits or sleeping habits and hygiene or school functioning, normal life functioning are really good indicators to be watching out for when it comes to potential addiction. Now, 1 or 2 of these in themselves doesn't necessarily mean your kid is addicted to the technology. I think many of us are going to check off 1 or 2 on these lists. But when you start to see 3 or 4 or even 5 of those happening, there might be an indication there's something kind of not going on that's good, something to be watching for. So number 1, we have the mental health component. 2, we have the addiction component. Number 3 is we have an anxiety and social anxiety component. We're finding that teens are actually becoming less proficient in reading and interpreting nonverbal and verbal cues. So therefore, kids are then also becoming less and less confident in their social skills, which then produces more social anxiety. There is a stat what teens prefer in their communication. So face-to-face, texting, social media, and video chatting. In 2012, 49% of teenagers preferred face-to-face communication as their ideal way of communicating. Number 2 was texting, which was 33%. And then social media was 7%, and video chatting was 2%. 6 years later, in 2018, in-person communication as the ideal way of communicating for teenagers dropped from 49% down to 32%. And texting went from 33% up to 35%. So in 2018, I imagine it's even grown here in the last 2 years, especially with COVID. Teens are actually preferring to communicate via text, more so, or message, more so than in face-to-face. And then social media went up from 7% to 16%, and video chatting went from 2% to 10%. I think it's an interesting statistic. Or there is that social anxiety of I'm so afraid of people judging me, I'm so afraid of how I'm going to come across, or we're so critical of ourselves in a social situation. We just start to get that paralyzing fear and not wanting to go out, not wanting to go and talk with people. There's also that fear of missing out that comes with social media, right? I would say 95% of our lives are pretty normal, like pretty mundane, day to day. Like my life doesn't look that much different day to day. But in that 5% that it does is typically the 5% that we post on social media. And so other students are seeing that other 5% of their friends and they're thinking, man, like that looks like 95% of their life, where it's only 5% of mine. I feel bad about myself. There's a lot of comparison traps that we fall into. And I think that's true for adults, even as much as it is for teenagers. Number 4 is that this leads to family conflict. 79% of parents think that devices and media cause conflict, whereas 70% of teens feel device causes conflict in their home. Both pretty high stats. Right, when we are getting reclusive and isolated, when we're not really connecting face to face, but rather we're down looking at a phone, it's natural we're going to have more conflict. And I challenge you parents too in what this looks like for you. Even family dinners, right? Do you prefer to be watching TV, or do you prefer to be kind of texting on your phone during a family dinner? Or do you have some type of rule where all that stuff gets put out just so you're able to focus on each other? Can you have a 10 to 15 minute conversation with your kid without having a need to look at your phone? I think it's important for us to challenge ourselves with too. And then lastly here, there's a potential for a lot of poor influences when it comes to technology. Young people that engage with media still consists primarily of consumption rather than creation. The vast majority of media time is them consuming things that other people have created for them that they're now just watching. I don't believe that God created us to be consumers. I think he created us to be creative, to go out and to be workers and doers and creating things and being in community, not just consuming passively stuff that other people have created. I also recognize that when your student is on playing a video game or they're on social media, that they have access to anybody in the world. All right, so they may feel safely up in their bedroom, but in their bedroom they are talking to any number of people that you have no idea who those people are. I think we need to be careful about who they're having access to, who they're talking to. In video games, you can sign on and play a game with just about anybody across the country, across the world. That person is oftentimes chatting in this chat through the video game, and they're talking to your son or your daughter. Right? They're using words and phrases, and they're talking about things as they're playing these games that you don't have any parental controls over that they're just talking. Same with social media, with Snapchat or Instagram or whatever. Somebody can friend your student, friend your kid, and now have access to talk to them, to send them things, send them pictures, to ask for things of them, to ask for information. 50% of teens said they've used social networking sites to express romantic interest in somebody. Many use that to display their romantic relationships. There's a whole MTV show that's just around catfishing, where someone's faking being another person to get in a relationship with someone. A survey of over 600 teens found that nearly all of them shared their real name and real photos of themselves. And most shared their school name, their birth date, or even the city or town where they lived. We're putting a lot of information out on the internet, and a lot of people have access to that. I also think that there's this piece around too, that the accessibility to porn that a lot of our students are experiencing. The most recent stat that I've seen is that the average age of exposure to porn is 9 years old. So we're talking about the average 9-year-old has been exposed to pornography on some type of media or technology device. We're also seeing that the average addiction to pornography, when I believe that porn is an addiction, is starting around 13 years old. So your average 13-year-old boy walking down the street, on average, could be addicted to porn. right? How much then does that affect his relationships? Or if the girls' porn rates are also very much on the rise in viewing that. How much that affects their relationships, much that affects their lives and their own brain development. Right? That accessibility to our students, no matter what it is, can be dangerous if we're not aware of what's going on. So I say this not to try to scare you guys. That is so not my heart as we go through this information. But rather, my heart is to say, hey, we have to understand the weight of handing over a phone to a 10-year-old or to a 12-year-old to a 16-year-old. Once again, we're not giving them the keys to our car until they are prepared and ready to go and drive that car. I think we need to be prepared. We need to be preparing our kids to have this device in their hands, to have these devices they have access to help them be able to be okay, right? Because we want them to be able to use it. They need to be able to use this stuff. So how are we preparing them well? So thank you guys for joining in. I hope this has been helpful so far. I really do just want to affirm you guys for taking the time to listen to this. So as you start to think through the values that you want to be communicating, what you guys want to be doing with your family. In the meantime, before our next session, if you have any questions or concerns or things you want to be able to reach out and ask for help, you can email a care ministry here at Flatirons Church. That's just care@flatironschurch.com. You can also click on the link that we're going to post here after the video to the parent resource website here at Flatirons as well. And we'll also be posting some more resources too next time to help you guys as you start to try to navigate these waters.